All right, here we go. It's the System Failure Podcast, number 21. How's it going, Nate?
Hey, Brian. How are you this week? We regrettably missed doing a pod last week because we were in the car headed down to Gillette Stadium to watch Bill Belichick's last ever game at the helm of the New England Patriots. So that was fun. The snow was flying. And we had intended to do a car ride pod, but we forgot the SD card. So we're back here 1 week hence and excited to get back into the swing of things, eh?
Yeah, well, we missed a podcast, but we do have a treat for our devoted listenership.
Yeah.
And the infamous the captain is in fact here, and we're gonna bring him on the pod, and he's gonna say some shit.
All right, great. Yeah, it'll be nice to get another perspective that's an alternative to the one that you and I have ginned up over these past 20 episodes, Brian. So it'll be good to get a little fresh intellectual blood into the mix, eh?
All right. Well, yes, just one thing is that we still only have two mics, two headphones. But I think that's okay. I mean, do you just want to get into it here? Like, do you have some hot topics of conversation? We want to talk about like the Czech Republic and resisting, authority.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's definitely going to happen. Well, let's save that for the very end because I have the concept of magic and its historical importance locked and loaded and ready to go for everyone's entertainment. But let's save that for the very end, and let's get into, let's introduce our dearest of friends, the captain, who is our guest, our first ever guest on the System Failure Podcast today. All right, here we go.
Ahoy, hoy, gentlemen.
Hello, Sir Stuart. It is nice to see you. You and I have been hanging out low these past 20 or 30 years. I think we went to the same middle school and high school together and the same college.
Yeah,
at least for a while.
We followed each other to college.
Yeah, yep. And now we're in our 40s, and we're still keeping it real. And our devoted System Failure fan base will no doubt remember many a reference to your skullduggery, and so it's interesting to have you standing in front of the mic for real in the flesh, Sir Stuart.
It's great to be here, guys. Yeah, no, it's been a wild ride, Nathan. Yeah, it's probably 96 or 95, somewhere around that range.
Yeah, I don't know what year we were in 7th grade, but I think 96 sounds about right. Well, okay, so we graduated high school in 02, and we would be in 7th grade 6 years prior. And so by my math, that makes it 96. I think that. Yeah. Well, but the fall would have been 1995, right? So
yeah, you're
I guess
right.
1995. Yeah. Wow, that seems so long ago now. The pre 9/11 world.
Well, we have. I know pre 9/11. That's the topic we should get into. We gotta add the red strings on the wall to tie it all back to 9/11. But
yeah, we're overdue for some red strings.
We were
for sure.
Little side note: I just want to point out that you and I were very against the war in Iraq back then, and probably amongst the few that were. There weren't too many people that were outspoken against the war, but we were, even as teenagers.
That's true. I forgot about that. You and I debated our entire freshman dorm about the horror of the invasion of Iraq in 03, the year after our illustrious high school career came to an end. That must mean we're geniuses, and that everything we say is more or less gospel. So I think that's a great thing to point out. Burnish our bona fides, burnish our credentials a little bit.
Well, we'll pat ourselves on the back there, but thinking about the stories that we have over the years, we probably should, we've humiliated ourselves a few times due to the drugs, actually. But it's just part of growing up. It's all part of learning the course of where to get where you're going, about the journey, right? But I was thinking, I do believe that sobriety should be held up as a target or a northern star to sail one ship by. One should always try to maximize your time on this earth, I guess. I do think that last part, though, is not a foregone conclusion. And I probably should insert here that I have historically been what I call an emo bitch, or a bit of a pessimist or a cynical. I call it realism, but I just want to put that as a disclaimer. The candle that burns twice as brightly burns half as long, but if you're trying to impact the waveform that is human history, I would argue that it's the people that live brightly and burn out quickly that make the largest impact on history. I was raised 14 years as a Protestant. I went to actually help teach Sunday school for 2 years and was confirmed for a year, but by my probably 15th or 16th year on this planet, I was a militant atheist.
Same.
Yeah. Well, we rebel against the things that we are taught are true, right? I suppose, but I'm finding my way not back to religion, but certainly to spirituality and the ideals that old JC held up there. I mean, he basically was the best person in history, as far as I can tell, and he was gone by, his 33rd year or 30th year, something like that. He certainly did not live a long life.
The zodiac is 360 degrees, and each of the 12 zodiac signs comprises 30 degrees, and the neutral zone between zodiac signs is often represented as about 3. Because you're talking about a picture, right? You can kind of whack up the belt that circles that appears to circle the circumference of the Earth at the equator, where the zodiac signs are. You don't really know where Cancer ends and Sagittarius begins. That's up to interpretation. Yep. So a 3-degree neutral zone is usually proposed between zodiac signs during the dance of orbital precession that takes 120,000 years each cycle. And so that's why the sun god is usually, his ministry begins at age 30. And then his death ends at age 33. That's usually how it works.
I mean, it's. I'm laughing because if you wrote the story down in a book, I mean, and you put it in a fictional section on the library, everybody would think it was a fictional story. No one would buy it was true, right? But it's funny how that works out. A lot of famous people that left an impact on history died in their early 30s. There's something about that 3. I don't know what it is, man. There's something about that number 3. 3 sisters, twisting fate,
or Trinity.
The Trinity. Yeah, exactly, the Holy Trinity. But back to my point here. I did just want to say that even though sobriety should be the guiding light, I know you two far too well to let that BS come too far, and you're not convincing me. I guess I have too many horror stories or stories of where we've had an incredible time or an embarrassing time.
Nonsense. I remember no such humiliations. I remember uninterrupted genius.
Yeah, well, when I was formulating my defense for drug use here, I actually I went through our history in my own mind, and I was thinking, we haven't been that bad. I've only embarrassed myself in, I guess Gray, Maine, and Daytona Beach, Florida, and Orlando, Florida, and Charlestown, Boston, and Beacon Hill, Boston, and I mean, I could go on and on, but yeah, I was actually kind of surprised how long the list is, but I have just found in life that there is nothing more true than the end of the night when everybody is out of their mind and you're just all hugging each other and looking in each other's eyes, man, and just talking about life. That is the truth. Everything has been whittled away by the booze.
Yes, okay. I agree. I too have felt that you can really you can almost sense the presence of God or a divinity or some kind when you're on the come up. I totally know what you're saying. So just to outline the battlefield here for the podcast number 21, it seems you've put on the table for consideration a motion that drug use ought not to be discounted, that discounting drug use can only be accomplished by reference to a value of the preservation of the vessel of the individual, and in the grand sweep of history, such considerations are so irrelevant as to be laughable. And so I understand what you're saying.
They're at least secondary, yeah.
Yeah, let's not worry about preserving our lungs, people. We got a revolution to prosecute here.
Well, we all got to punch that time card. And yeah, I get that, more time on the planet. First of all, I am under no illusion that when it is my time to go, I'm not going to want to go. I'm sure survival preservation will be raging in full force, and I'll want to spend more time with my family and, hanging out with you gents and everybody else. But that's just because I'll be stuck in that part of the story at that time, I think. We all have to go eventually, and I think that the people that make it to a buck, or a $1.15 or something like that, these aren't the people, these aren't the movers and shakers of history. You know what I mean? These are the boring people that you know in your life that are doing 10 under in the fucking down the road and make sure that, that they get enough Weetabix that morning. You know what I mean? These aren't people that are moving the dial on history.
Okay, that's a solid point worth considering. Well, let's build the wall one brick at a time here, because I will at least agree this far, right, that altering your consciousness can provide a second line of sight on reality. That is to say, if you're observing a valley from a mountaintop, you will have a two-dimensional picture. But if you climb off that mountaintop and then climb up to another mountaintop, you will have a slightly different view of the valley, and that binocular vision affords you a three-dimensional view of the valley versus a two-dimensional view. It's exactly the same principle by which 3D glasses work at the movie theater, right? You get two slightly different images in your left and right eye, and that makes the action on screen pop out, right? Yeah. So this is so I'll agree that far.
All right, well, I'm just going to jump in here. See, I guess I'm probably the biggest advocate for sobriety in the room. But, one thing is like William Wallace, if the Die Hard movie is supposed to be believed, but, he's about to be executed and, the young damsel there offers him some kind of milk of the poppy or something. He's like, I need my wits about me as he's about to be murdered. And, I just have to say that that's pretty hardcore.
I would definitely agree that's hardcore, but would you also agree that it is equally hardcore? Was it Albert Huxley that asked for LSD on his deathbed?
Yep.
And famously a second dose. The first one wasn't enough.
His wife was to administer the dose, and he was on LSD. He was dying, and he made the sign to demand even more LSD.
This ain't real enough, boys. I need more. Like, what?
That takes balls.
See, it's funny because you really don't need to get executed. You really don't need your wits about you. You just need to lay there. You chop your head off or whatever. Yeah.
Well, that's a very good point, Brian. That's a very, very good point, Brian. Yeah. Wallace did not go out in a great way.
All right, well, I think we can at least provisionally agree that drugs are a tool that belong in the toolbox, as Brian immortally said on an earlier version of this pod, right? He can't recommend doing drugs necessarily, but he definitely can't recommend having not done them, right? That's where you don't want to be.
That is the best way to put it, and I smiled when you said that on the pod, Brian, because that really is where you want to be. I've known far too many people in my life that just get stuck in a rut and live in that rut their entire lives, just never going outside of it because they're comfortable in their routine. It doesn't doing things outside of your routine, doing things that you're not used to causes anxiety. Well, a beer before you do something you've never done before will help take the edge off. You know what I mean? And maybe you'll do something you've never done before, or otherwise you wouldn't have. You don't want to be drinking beer all day, every day. That's a hell of your own creation. But I think that also never using them is also a hell of your own creation because you're not... I know a lot of people that don't want to, they have some kind of, anxiety about losing control in their lives. They don't want to, have more than one beer or try weed because they're afraid that they'll lose control. And I'm just like, what do you think you're going to do? It's just so wild to me that those are the people that are staring at the wall in Plato's allegory of the cave. To your point on one of the earlier pods, that to never venture out and to stare into the sunshine. I don't know, because you're too afraid of losing control. I don't quite understand that. I don't know. I would rather than putter along through life at a comfortable speed that will make sure you don't go off the road or go into any ditches. I don't know, man. I'd rather hop in that freaking bright orange freaking Lamborghini and give it hell and go through the pearly gates backwards in a ball of flame.
I in the end ultimately agree with you, Sir Stuart. But I will admit that when you sail to the edge of the world and there's that waterfall. And the prow of your boat sticks out over the, start sticking out over the edge. Yeah. When you've had a couple heroes' journeys of mushrooms, maybe, and the bow of your boat is creaking out over the edge of the end of the world. You're like, oh man, I've really done it this time. And I guess I can understand the fear of the prisoner in Plato's allegory of the cave. I can understand, there's the shadows on the wall, but at least I know. They may be shadows, though they may be. At least I know what they are. They're a known quantity. And snapping out of that spell and turning around and look behind you, who knows what kind of monsters could be the ones casting the shadows. So maybe it's better just to focus on the shadow and not... Because what's real may be far worse or far more terrifying or far more unsettling. But I think ultimately, and I agree with you, it's the calcified mind is far scarier than whatever could be out there in the turbulent black seas, right? Being closed-minded, very scary to me. That's where I don't. And I know people what you're saying who can never who have that calcified mindset, and I never want to end up there.
Yeah. Well, clearly everything in moderation is the best route for it, and I've never been one for moderation. more than an individual, I think that it's drugs that have gotten us here as a species. You know, I suppose we'll never know, but the theory of, you know, sapiens coming down out of the tree and following the herds and eating the things that they could find along the way behind the herd, which sometimes would include, you know, mushrooms that would make you feel funny.
This is stoned ape theory, right? The Sahara Desert was once a jungle.
Yeah, a lush jungle, yeah.
And now it's a desert, and in between being a jungle and a desert, it was a savanna. And when it converted from jungle to savanna, the primates that lived there either starved to death or they climbed down out of the trees and started looking for alternative food sources and were walking on two legs.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, the mushroom is represented by the obelisk in 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? It comes down and it literally gives sapiens intelligence. I mean, that's what we realized for the first time that you know, we realized for the first time as a species what it was to work together and take it to the next level. And obviously, we've been doing that ever since. So. You know, you don't want to rely on drugs so much as an individual that you're down by, you know, the homeless shelter there. That's obviously, or those horrifying videos out of, you know, the larger cities in this country where people are just addicted to fentanyl bent over on the side of the street. You know, there's definitely a sickness in this country that's getting worse. But I think that that's a sickness of ego. We need to re-realize what the mushrooms originally taught us, that the individual is really just a brick in a wall, or a part in the machine.
Well, I think that you know, doing the mushrooms, it does give you like a grand vision of you know, what could be. But I mean, I definitely don't think that doing the mushrooms is like how to sort of manifest that vision. But it is a way to see what's possible. But in terms of actually like, you know, trying to, you know, create that, I mean, the key isn't to like you know, do drugs.
Are you saying, Brian, that drugs are like a map, like Google Maps maybe, and you still have to actually prosecute the trip, even though the Google Maps may show you the way? Like the Google Maps is not how you get to the destination. The Google Maps is how you navigate. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't even think it's the map. It's more like it just shows you the destination, but how to get there is still quite a bit of a mystery.
All right, that's fair. Yeah, that's good.
Do you think that Jesus did psychedelics?
Well, I mean, I think that I don't think that doing psychedelics is bad. I mean, my question for you, Christopher, would be: do you think that? So you think that Jesus was like an actual person? I mean, I myself am a bit undecided on the matter.
Yeah, I guess I would probably fall into squarely. I don't know enough to have a strong opinion, but
well, I think that most. I mean, I think it's good to have done psychedelics for sure. Probably for most people, definitely for me. But I guess at least for me, I think I got lost in the weeds in terms of doing drugs, and like I believe that by doing drugs I was bettering myself. I mean, it definitely gave me a vision of what's possible. But I don't know, just doing the drugs themselves isn't really the way to achieve what you're trying to achieve. I guess would be my opinion.
No, I hear what you're saying. You're not going to find Valhalla in drugs. I guess I just don't think you're going to find Valhalla no matter what. But maybe that's my pessimism.
I guess the Valhalla, you know, I think you have to achieve through cultivation. I mean, I think you have to cultivate what you're trying to create ultimately. And so...
Oh, yeah, you reap what you sow, right?
Yeah. So... I mean, I think doing psychedelics is valuable for most people, probably. But, I mean, ultimately, we're trying... I mean, it's just not... I mean, doing drugs, like, isn't the recipe for success, right? I mean, it's going to be like hard work is the recipe for success.
Well, I guess, yeah, fair enough. Yes, it is. Hard work and discipline is a recipe for success as an individual, but I'm not sure it's a recipe for success as like a society or a species. I've told you guys this plan before, but to steal a plan from the Scarecrow from Batman Begins, you know, I still submit that. This is going to get me on a list somewhere, but going to a large city and the water treatment facility there and taking a couple, you know, drums of LSD and dumping it in there would probably wake a lot of people up, if nothing else, to the cage that they're in.
Well, given the state of society, I'm not sure that would be such a bad thing.
You think we're already there? The LSD is unnecessary?
Well, I mean, I think we're just in a place where we probably do need the LSD in drinking water. It's rough out there, man.
Well, it's a sickness of ego, and it's infected nearly everyone in this country, as far as I can tell. Normally, to me, the lesson of World War II and the Nazis is that you have a third of your society that is always going to be for authority and authoritarianism. To me, there's a third of your society that is always going to be for strong democracy, and you have, the middle third that's going to go one way or the other. And it's the middle third that really decide everything, as we found out in 2016 there, because old Hillary just couldn't keep her mouth shut and just kept insulting people left and right that she needed to vote for her. It was a foregone conclusion in her mind.
Well, before we venture so far afield, just to get into the 2016 primary, I would like to mention with satisfaction that the Scarecrow plan of dosing everyone with LSD was mentioned before on this very pod by this very commentator, and I'm delighted to report, credited to you, sir, the captain, at that moment. So it's good to come full circle there.
Well, it may go the way that the city of Munster did, and I forget what year that was, the 1600s or something like that, when apparently there might have been an ergot poisoning in their granaries.
The Anabaptist Revolt of Munster.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nathan.
One hell of an incident involving a great many sexual orgies and priests raving about Armageddon and heavy eye black. It was quite a scene.
Sounds like a good time to me, guys. I mean, come on. But yeah, the cages that they put the bodies in and hung them from the local cathedral are still there, aren't they?
The conspirators. Bernard Knipperdoling, Jan van Leyden, and a third man whose name now escapes me. But had their skin ripped off with hot tongs.
Oh, with hot tongs. Yeah, they were flayed alive.
Were placed in cages to suffer, hoisted by chain to the ramparts of Munster Cathedral, where their cages still remain to this day. Their bodies having long since been consumed by birds and decayed. That's the result of supposedly a late frost that caused moisture in the barley crop. The barley grew ergot, aka a psychedelic fungus, a magic mushroom, and then people consuming the bread that spring went off a little crazier than usual, and they overthrew the Prince Bishop of Munster, ejected him from the city, and he had to return with an army to reconquer his own city. And when he did, he put the
laid his own city under siege, and then they prosecuted them, and the rest is history. But it certainly could go that way, admittedly. But I also think it could go the way of old JC and his 12 disciples there, because the story that he was spitting to me is remarkably psychedelic about, love your neighbor as you love thyself, and there but for the grace of God go I, and all that. I mean, that
John
guy,
Bradford.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. Yeah, I mean, he literally saw, to me, Jesus saw past communism even. He saw to the thing that's going to come after that. He saw to the singularity. I don't know how we get there, either through AI or through sticking a chip in each of our brains, like cyberpunk. But he was able to see that far ahead. That's wild to me.
Well, I would like to point out the topic here is psychedelic nature of Christianity, but I would like to point out that the Bible and the Christian religion come from the collapse of a major economic system, aka the Roman Empire. You could say the Bible is the document that arose during the collapse of one economic mode of being and the adoption of another, and its successor, the medieval period, collapsed. I would argue that the foundational document that comes out of the collapse of medieval society is Dante's Inferno, but the Anabaptist Revolt of Munster is part of the broader Protestant Reformation. So everything we're talking about comes from the moments when society decays and starts crumbling and systems start breaking down. So bookmark that, because I want to return to that when we get to magic later. But your main contention here, Sir Stuart, is the psychedelic nature of Christianity. And I think when you look at the history of the pre-Christian religions, the pagan religions that existed in the same area of the world prior to Christianity's arrival in the between the 1st and the 3rd century AD, there's no question that it's based on, like the Eucharist of Christianity, the bread and the wine that you consume that's supposedly the body and flesh of the actual God, right? That's a theophagia, God-eating ceremony, and it matches exactly the bread offered up to the green god Demeter, so that there is now archaeological evidence that the bread, the beer brewed from the barley that was given up to the goddess of cereal grains Demeter contained ergot. That comes from a archaeological site just out of Marseille, Spain, which was once the Greek colony of Marsala. And the name of the site is Mascas de Pontos, and at that site there are copycat Demeter rites. The main site of Eleusis has been desecrated over and over again, but this is a much more obscure example of Greek colonists acting out their religion far from home at this Greek colony Marsala. And of course, the calculus on the tooth found of a human jawbone and a ceremonial chalice itself have both now tested positive for ergot. That finding came in 2003 from some Catalan academics who wrote up their paper in the Catalan language. And so we in the West, the English-speaking West, Catalan is an obscure language from Catalonia, that part of eastern Spain that borders Marseille. So we didn't get the news until 2020 when Brian Morarescu published his book. That's what was indeed has been actually found at Mescais de Pontos. So that's really convincing evidence that what they were consuming at Eleusis, some 14 miles outside of Athens, was indeed ergot. And then, of course, there's the wine of Dionysus, the mirror cult to that of Eleusis, the more popular one among regular folks. Eleusis was attended by the Julius Caesars and the Socrateses and the ruling upper class Athenians. But the Dionysian ceremony was celebrated by everyone. You would just go out in the hills and get hammered drunk and have sexual orgies. And they were drinking this... back in the day, wine... It was not just wine. It was a mixer for some crazily psychedelic drugs. There's this guy, Dioscorides. He wrote a 5-volume pharmacopoeia, which in like the 1st century AD, 2nd century AD, it's a list of what every single plant in the forest does. And there's 5 volumes. This thing was considered an encyclopedia. Like, it was a pharmacopoeia up until the Renaissance, until someone wrote a better one. It was like the reference book for what the plants in the forest do. And we should note with a raised eyebrow that the entire 5th volume is devoted to wine mixed with other crazy drugs, like henbane, ones that'll make you go off a little crazy. And so that's likely what the Dionysian sect was consuming. And Dionysus, of course, is born of a virgin. He's killed and resurrected. He has long hair. He's the wine god from the Levant, which is apparently where grapes are first originated from. They still call it wine country to this day. The regions of like Syria and Lebanon, and I think even northern Israel. But at any rate, this is the early Christian cult has all of the stamps of the Dionysian and Eleusinian drug cults that came before them. You still, to this day, you go into any modern church and see the wine and the bread, the sheaf of grain. So I think you're onto something. In other words, that's my very long way of saying, yeah, I kind of agree.
Am I mistaken in that Jesus, at least supposedly, had some kind of relationship with... I forget how, but either his father or otherwise, some monk, some kind, not monk, but, Jewish holy person, basically, that would understand the ancient knowledge of how to do some of these things, make potentially like mix ergot without actually killing someone.
Yeah, well, that's the secret. I don't know. I've never heard that. If that's true, I would love to know about that. Yeah. Because it could be like a much more explicit, it's not just that Jesus seems exactly like the pre-Christian pagan cultists who did drugs, but he actually has a way of...
I wish I remember that connection, because,
Look
like
it up.
You guys, I think I pointed out before, monks would have the access to the ancient knowledge, right? They were the ones that were copying all the scrolls, and they probably actually understood what they were reading, right? So that's why, the English... Friar Tuck, right? It's a drunk dude. Because he knows how to brew beer.
Right, the recipes, right? The only people that have any books, know how to read them or to make the illuminated manuscripts are the monks, of course, And that's why the mountain pass through the Alps has the monks that brew the... Didn't you go to that monastery that brew the beer?
St. Bernards,
the St. Bernards would carry the cask of beer to help rescue avalanche victims.
Yeah.
Or you can still buy Frangelico liqueur today, and it's shaped in the shape of a monk, and there's a rope around the middle of the bottle to represent the belt that the monks would wear for their habits, right?
That's
so
exactly
it's like,
right. Yeah.
When you got ergot poisoning in the Middle Ages, ergotism, or not St. Elmo's fire, what did they call it? St. Elmo's fire is the electromagnetic...
St. Elmo's fire is the plasma that shows up on the top of your mast when you're... about to be struck by lightning,
I
potentially.
forgot what they called it. Saint somebody's fire.
I know what you're talking about, though.
Ergotism is no fun. Yeah, if
it's
your,
not fun at
your
all.
barley crop gets moist, and then you start to grow these mushrooms. And they say that beer masters to this day, if you went down to Shipyard Brewing here in beautiful Portland, Maine, and you asked the brewmaster, "Hey, how often you tested for ergot?" He would say all the time, "We're terrified that some ergot might have gotten into the barley that we use to make our Shipyard beer." And we have to make sure we don't ship any of that ergot to customers because they're going to go on a wild trip.
Come on, bud. Sneak a little bit in there for me, will you? Please.
Well, if you're not careful with the mixture, they'll drop dead, and then you'll have a lawsuit on your hands.
Yeah.
And so that's why when people succumb to ergotism in the Middle Ages, it was only the monks and the monasteries who would know how to try to bring them back around. They're the keepers of the knowledge of all the magic potions. And to your point, I remember the Friar Tuck in the 1991 version of Robin Hood with Kevin Costner. He's like,
oh my goodness,
he has his fat fingers. He's the psychologist from Office Space, right? Yeah. And he picks up the grain seeds and they're running through his fat fingers, and he's like, "Behold, grain, which any fool can eat, but for which the Lord has intended a more divine means of consumption, beer." Yeah, and he has alcohol stills are always blowing up. You hear him off camera, there's an explosion. He goes, and he's loving it. Yeah, yep, that's exactly so. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some psychedelic connection to early Christianity. One thing's for sure, if Brian Morarescu included this in his book as well, the same one that broke the big news about the ergot on the tooth and on the chalice in Mascas de Pontos in Spain. He went to the St. Peter's, and have you ever gone to the under? You've been to St. Peter's more than I have. I've been there once. But you've been there several times. Yeah, but you never got to go into the Undercroft, right?
I don't think I've been in the Undercroft. No, I did do the extended tour where you go up into the actual dome.
I'm jelly. We were going to do that. We ran out of time. We didn't get back to St. Peter's in time to do it.
It was pretty wild. You go into some pretty sketchy areas. It's like a double dome almost. So there's
I did do the Duomo in Florence, which is exactly the same.
There's an outer dome and an inner dome.
Michelangelo is St. Peter's, and constructed by Bruno Shelley is Florence, but very similar ideas. Like Michelangelo, he would have been aware of what was going on in Florence. And
so there's an outer shell and an inner shell, and you go up this tiny little spiral staircase. There's actually a rope hanging down the middle of it because you would fall down the stairs if there wasn't a rope hanging there. It's so small. And then you climb up to the top of the dome in between the outer shell of the dome and the inner shell of the dome. So the stairs start off really deep but really not very tall, and then by the end it's pretty neat. It was a pretty neat experience. But I did not get to go down into the catacombs beneath it. That would have been pretty neat.
Down there, the footstones, the foundation stones to Old St. Peter's, which existed from the time of Constantine all the way up to when Michelangelo and Raphael replaced it in 1512, whenever they completed St. Peter's Basilica in Rome.
It took them a long time. It was over 100 years it took them to build that thing, right? Yeah,
it was a lengthy and exhaustive construction process. And they had other designers too. Michelangelo and Raphael, the two. I feel like Raphael adorned it more than structurally designed it. But we're running far afield.
Yes, we are.
The point I wish to make about St. Peter's is, according to Brian Morarescu's book, if you go down below St. Peter's, there's Old St. Peter's Basilica, where Charlemagne was crowned emperor on Christmas Day of the year 800. And then below that is the necropolis. There's most of these European... You've gone to the necropolis of Paris, which I really want to do. Yeah, that's one of the crazier ones with all those bones and skulls. There's thrones of bone down there. What the hell?
Oh, it's miles and miles. People have gotten lost and died down in there in the darkness because they couldn't find their way out. They were running out of room in all the graveyards, so they dug all the graveyards up and put all the bones down in the catacombs, which were mines. They were mines. That's where they got all the stone to build the city of Paris. So they just stacked all the bones down in there. So you'll see a room and they'll just be stacked with femurs. No other bones, just thousands of femurs, bones. Fucking wild.
Eesh.
Yeah.
Well, shaking that. That's why I want to go there. It's super dramatic.
It's very neat. It's a wild experience.
Shaking off that super creepy imagery. So you go below St. Peter's. There's a similar idea, necropolis, with all kinds of burial chambers there, and they would, and you can find murals down there of something called. You find all these really early Christian. You find murals depicting people engaged in very early Christian practices, and it looks a lot more like magic. Magic wands, and they've got big cauldrons in the middle of the room. They're cooking up some kind of something, and this is going to be like the bread of Demeter or the wine of Dionysus or something like that. And That's really the point, that early Christianity was very, very magical and matched the aforementioned ceremony, the rites of Demeter and the rites of Eleusis very closely. A lot of those concepts get copied and pasted into Christianity, of course, right? There's something called syncretism, where religions one doesn't end and a new revelation begins. They morph into each other, right? We celebrate Christmas, the birth of the Savior, on the December the 25th, because sun gods are always born on the winter solstice. That's just the way it goes. Just they're murdered on the spring equinox. They're born on the winter solstice, and we've said it before. But I think that if you look in the Bible, you can tell by what the pastoralists are doing, what the shepherds are doing, that it's like March or May or something when they're
springtime.
Yeah, it's not really Christmas time, but you have to make things easier, especially for the Norse pagan religions of Central and Northern Europe. That you're like now, that as the Roman Empire dies and medieval society is born, you're now forcing these people to adopt a sword point. You make things a little easier by making Christmas match the old Yule celebration.
It's like the original
right?
Mad Men, right? We got to sell this thing, guys. What are we going to do to fucking sell this thing? Come on, pound on the table.
Precisement.
Yeah.
So there is. All right. So at the top of this conversation, we were really talking about, do drugs have any real value or not? And we talked about how there may be a tool in your toolbox for at least navigating, and how maybe Christianity bears all the hallmarks of this psychedelic business. And so that brings me back to the thing you said at the very top of this pod, Sir Stuart, about how you used to be a hardcore militant atheist, and how you've morphed over time, and now you have turned 40 like me, and now you're not so sure. Would you say that's accurate?
I would, I suppose, yeah. I do understand the overwhelming importance of the scientific method, right? It is basically Occam's razor incarnate, right? If you can't, it's why we have gotten as far as we have as a species in a lot of ways. I used to, in my militant atheist phase, wear a shirt around that had a picture of a teapot orbiting somewhere between Mars and the asteroid belt around the sun. And, maybe one person I ever met got it. But what it's referencing is Bertrand Russell's teapot, which is, he used it as an argument against religion, but it kind of points out the main fault and the main flaw in the scientific method. Or really, it points out where it can't be applied. In that, suppose that there's a teapot orbiting the sun somewhere between Mars and the asteroid belt. I just make that claim. Disprove it. I mean, you can't possibly, right?
Yeah.
We call these unfalsifiable claims, right? Claims are either falsifiable, you can disprove them, or they're unfalsifiable. And if it's unfalsifiable, such in the case of a teapot orbiting the sun, but slightly outside the orbit of Mars, there's no way you can prove that or disprove it, right?
So in other words, a symmetry of evidence, a symmetry of the weight of evidence. Said even another way, that which can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence.
Exactly, just as easily.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's all well and good when you're trying to build cell phones and buildings and stuff like that. But when you're trying to look within oneself and also try to understand the trajectory of us as a species, it really kind of is not very helpful. It's like someone handing a tape measure when you're talking about astronomical distances. You're like, well, yes, it's just not. I get what you're trying to point out, but it's not useful at all to what we're trying to do here. So I think that, and I think you guys have talked about it before, there's almost like, not almost, there is like a religion built around, a modern religion built around the concept of the scientific method that really tries to force out anything that points out this fact that yes, science is all well and good, and in fact, I consider myself an engineer. I took all math classes, I took all physics classes. You want to talk about physics and math? I'll talk about it all day long. I love that shit. But it has its time and its place. And when you're talking about these topics, about what are we? I hate that question. What are we here for? Because you can stick any combination of words together with a question mark at the end. That doesn't mean the question makes any goddamn sense. But there is something going on that we don't understand. I don't think you would find anybody, even the most hardened scientist, who would say that we understand everything that's going on. Maybe you could, but my point is that we have to find other tools to use to figure out some of the stuff that science can't figure out for us. And just sticking our fingers in our ears and going, la, 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 just apply the scientific method, and if that doesn't work, then it's not real. That just really limits your worldview of what's actually going on around us. It's entirely possible that, I don't know, everyone's heard this argument. It's tired by now. We've all seen the movie The Matrix, but, science would never be able to help you out in that scenario if we were actually a simulation. I've argued
great inside the Matrix doesn't help you so much with dealing with the reality that there is a Matrix and what that means for how we should be spending our time within it. Yeah,
exactly, 100%. So I have not given up on it because I like driving my car, and I think fusion energy would be freaking sweet. But that is kind of magic, right? that would probably be the ultimate magical. That would be the alchemic creation of science, is fusion-free energy. But
I forgot the name of the man who made this claim in a book. Oh man, I'll remember it after the pod's over, for sure. But his argument was that electricity was the descent of God into history. It's everything magic, right? Action at a distance. Notice that all of the great dreams of alchemy, turning lead into gold, totally possible. Nuclear fusion.
Now, yeah.
I think they do it with a titration method, even that they don't even have to go all the way to nuclear fusion. It costs. Yeah. You get a few atoms of gold.
Much more.
It costs like millions of dollars, so it ain't really financially viable. But you could turn lead into gold. Trivial.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to go online and Google, history of fusion funding versus time, and I think you'll find out why we haven't discovered fusion energy. If there was a Manhattan Project for fusion energy, we'd probably discover it within a decade. Certainly, I don't think it would be that much longer.
Is the volume of funding collapsing or increasing?
It never existed.
Oh,
it's always been a flat line. You guys talk a lot about financial leverage and authority, and who actually has their hands on the train's lever here, or the car steering wheel. But
well, I would slow it down and repeat many of the things you just said in a slightly different way to bring us back to the precipice here, because one of the main reasons I was excited to have you, Sir Stuart, on the podcast today is because you and I have sat in class together and we've run an integral that defines the magnetic field around a charged ring. We've been down the old science, and we used to be very smug and superior towards anything spiritual, horoscopes and psychics and religion and whatever.
That's true.
We thought that we were like, these people believe some shit without sufficient evidence, and that makes us ahead of them even at age 19 and 20 and 21. And now here we are 40, saying, I think I'd like to have me some of that spiritualism. And so that's a very interesting transition. And I think that your point here is that the scientific method is all well and good in the context of the 4D the 4D calliope that clatters all around us every day, the matrix itself, all of the things that seem like they're happening, easy to get lost in that illusion. But I guess another way I would say that is the calculus-related way. And calculus is the great study of rates. You've been there next to me. We understand integrals and derivatives, that there's a ladder of rates, of comparative rates, and so that something like velocity, which is your position over time, can be... There's another dimension to that, which is like acceleration is your change in velocity over time, where velocity is your change in position over time. And then there's a fourth integral, jerk, which is your change in acceleration over time. But my Honda Jalopy can go 0 to 60. That from 0 miles per hour to 60 miles an hour, that's a 60 mile an hour acceleration. But the thing that the Porsche 911 GT3 RS can do that in 2.9 seconds, where mine takes 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 seconds. So it's that jerk that really makes it fun to ride on a roller coaster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's once you see the beauty of calculus, I mean, it's like walking into the Louvre and seeing the Mona Lisa or something. I actually was very impressed by the Mona Lisa. It's tiny, but like Michelangelo's David, that is something that will move you when you see it.
Okay. Yeah,
it's fucking art, is what it is. Calculus is art.
I have seen the David. That made me feel bad about my lack of accomplishments. That's for sure. I was also struck by how keen a man like Michelangelo, noted homosexual, he was like. I was like, this is a man who loves some male bodies.
He knew it was up.
He gave it a good hard looking over. No question about that. The Mona Lisa, by all accounts, is very small. It's an example of chiaroscuro shading, of which Leonardo da Vinci pioneered. It was his hallmark sort of way of doing art. And it's also a depiction of a woman with a sly smile.
Yeah, it's the smile.
Yeah, the underground cults that survived the age of Christianity always used the woman with a sly smile as a way to express the secret of individuality, the notion that you are not really you. Your existence as an individual is a total illusion, and that women were uniquely, like, this is what the cult of Demeter was all about. It was a celebration of women. The secret was kept by women and passed down through generations of priestesses. It was all. In truth, the strings were pulled by a rich ruling family in Athens, but it was nominally a cult of femininity. The secret that you are not you really yourself is characterized as feminine because women alone have the experience of childbirth, of having their single individual forked into two. And so that's what the sly, smiling woman is. Still like a Masonic symbol to this day, and it goes back to ancient Egyptian religion. Another way to come at that same thing would be through calculus. And the great revelation for calculus for me, and I wonder if you would agree, and by the way, calculus invented by Sir Isaac Newton, a man who was an autist, unquestionably.
He was an alchemist.
He was an alchemist. That was his other big thing.
Very much believed in magic.
Yeah, he had gravitational. He formalized the equations of gravity. He invented calculus, and he thought he was on the road to alchemy. Also, he died a virgin. He wanted to
that's right.
emulate the man Jesus Christ, who he thought was the perfect person. And the reason he thought himself as Christ-like was because he had a chance to be born on December the 25th. Isaac Newton born on Christmas Day, of course.
Right. I had forgotten all that, but I do remember that now. Yeah.
Well, if I tell you, Stuart, that it's 150 miles to Boston, and if I tell you it's 2 hours to Boston, these are two ways of conveying the exact same piece of information.
Yeah.
Said another way, this dimension of time and this physical dimension, the thing we measure with a stopwatch and the thing we measure with the tape measure, the ruler, are interchangeable.
Einstein taught us that exactly. They're really the same thing.
They fit in the calculus, for the purposes of calculation, they fit together like Lego bricks. They're obviously two of a kind. And if that's true, we can use the analogy of a symphony. You sit in the concert hall listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in all of its grandeur, and like the rest of the audience, you're stuck in the time signature. You can only consider each note as it's played, and you have no way. Yeah. But if you were to view the sheet music, you could see the entire symphony, or at least as much as would fit on one page, all at once. And so the sheet music transforms that temporal dimension into a physical dimension. And if the physical dimension and the temporal dimensions are interchangeable, and that we just perceive a fourth dimension as temporal, that is to say, we have our length, our width, and our height, but we can't fit another ruler into that triad. Again, the number 3 comes up, by the way.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Because we measure things at orthogonal angles, that now we're getting into trig, but let's not go down that road. I can geek out with you about trig. There are 3 orthogonal angles, length, width, and height, but you can't hide another orthogonal angle into that matrix, and so we animate it like a flip book. Like you take the cube that has a length, a width, and a height. You can't add another dimension, so you conceptualize it at 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m. That's your fourth axis. Right. Well, that was the big insight for me for calculus, and what that means for like in terms that means that like your youth, you as an old man exist in some sense right now, and you as a child exist in some sense right now, and oh my God, your ancestors all exist in some sense right now, and so do your children of your children, your future descendants. And suddenly this whole vase pops out of the fourth dimension and starts taking shape, and you want to know what... You're like, okay, what is the... Let's find the borders of this thing. Let's figure out what it is that we're a part of. And that's where you really run out, and the scientific method can't help you anymore once you get beyond that fourth dimension.
That's really well said. I think that's where we are that's where I feel poised as an individual, and I think that's where we're poised as a species. Where do we go from here? Do we descend back into the ego, or do we move forward and realize that, a rising tide floats all boats?
I think the ego is a way... What was the name of the poet laureate of England during the Victorian times? Now, oh my God, I'm forgetting his name, but he wrote that famous
Not
line.
Shelley or Lord
Percy,
Byron.
not Percy by Shelley.
Sorry, I'm drilling. But sorry,
It's killing me. It's right on the edge of my... Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. Alfred Lord Tennyson, he had that crazy line that dragons... he's talking about, history. Dragons of the prime tearing at each other with... tearing at each other in the slime. That's where that same poem is where the red in tooth and claw comes from. That line, it's crazy.
Well, I think that's what's going on right now. I think that we're not even just a country. I think we're certainly a country that's consumed by ego, but a global. I think we're a globe that's consumed by ego right now.
Yeah.
I think that that way lies monsters. It's we could get into current events, I'm sure, pretty easily, but it's we are clearly treading into territory that we have not been in at least, I don't know, 40 or 50 years.
Well, I thought atheism was the coolest. I thought that it's just so neat and organized.
Yeah.
And so that's
for
why
everything, right?
That's why it brings me shame now to have to try to convince you, Sir Stuart, about magic. I mean, because I think that the real dichotomy of history is not science versus religion. Science and religion are like Democrat and Republican. They exist within the same paradigm, and it's a distraction. It's a red herring. It's heads I win, tails you lose proposition.
Yeah, sure.
I think the real divide that animates all of history. Notice that the Christianity and the Protestant Reformation come at the ends of great economic systems as they collapse. I think the true battle lines in history is Platonism or magic versus. Is the universe, is the mind moving around inside the universe, or is the universe created by the mind? Because I think that science has come up against it, right? You know as well as I the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. This is where Erwin Schrödinger and Werner Heisenberg made their bones, right? Schrödinger's cat. The point is that reality doesn't resolve into... It's a probabilistic equation until someone observes it. But prior to observation, it's like an email that hasn't been sent. It could go to anyone. It could go to anyone in the world.
Not only that, but you change the outcome by observing it.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. You can't know the...
But you not necessarily change, but the outcome is undeterministic until you actually observe it.
Yeah, you can't know the momentum P equals mv of an electron and its position simultaneously. This is the great problem of quantum mechanics. And then there's the placebo effect, where people are given sugar pills and even like there's the nocebo effect, where you give someone a sugar pill and say this is a sugar pill, it will not cure your issue, and just because you're giving them medicines, they still do better than the group that didn't have that happen to them. Like that's the scientific method has. The shovel of the scientific method is clunked into a treasure chest. And I think what's happened is that science is a bastardization of magic, one that's convenient for the capitalist banks who emerged in the Renaissance in the wake of the Middle Ages. Because the pattern here is that entrepreneurs loan money to... banks loan money to entrepreneurs who leverage science in the guise of technology, bring it to market, make the money, pay back the banks, right? Our Caesar is now the banks. Caesar was Caesar during the Roman Empire. Caesar was the Pope during the medieval period, even dressed like him. And now Caesar is the banks, and they still use the symbols of old Egyptian magic. It's why you can find, and this really blew my mind, it's why our dollar has the unfinished pyramid with the Eye of Horus above it. It's why you can find an unfinished pyramid just outside the window in Prague Castle, where the two Catholic administrators were ejected in the famous defenestration of Prague in 1619 that kicked off the 30 Years' War, that brought about the Protestant Reformation, that deposed the Pope and put the Pope back below the crowned heads of Europe, resubjugated the Pope below the kings of Europe, whereas the Pope had been the one pulling the strings, the puppet master, since 800, when he crowned Charlemagne and the aforementioned Old St. Peter's in year 800. The point here is outside the window of Prague Castle, where those Catholic administrators were ejected, it stands an unfinished pyramid with a copper top on it. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I was like, there's also two obelisks all within a 50-foot radius. It's absolutely crazy. Or you can go to the Medici Museum, the Uffizi Gallery, and you can see the painting Supper at Emmaus, and there's a picture of Jesus at the table with his apostles, and hovering above his head, of course, is the unfinished pyramid in the Eye of Horus. You're like, okay, what? I think it's that the forces of magic. I think that when systems are working well, it's really, really easy to believe in what the priesthood tells us. And the priesthood is controlled by the ruling elite, the people who make money when the rest of us wake up every morning and go to work.
Yeah.
and that they want us to believe that we are not creators of reality. It's a disempowering message. We people are just observers of reality. We're not also creators of it, but everyone knows that when you sleep, you simultaneously create and observe a vast dreamscape. Our brains are capable of a lot more than our masters of empire would like us to believe. And so empires are built on this idea that you are a mind moving around inside the universe. You are a humble mind inside a grand creation. The number of gods doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. Science teaches this. The science has had to sail past this assumption just to set up shop. And now they're finding out through the placebo effect and the double slit experiment and the advent of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics that, reality is created when you observe it. The act of observation is itself an act of creation. And so I think that the real battle line is magic versus materialism or scientism or religion versus magic.
Yeah. The thing that really, you said something on a recent podcast that really spelled it out in plain words for me is that, if enough people believe something is true, I mean, there is really no difference between that thing being true and that thing not being true.
Yeah.
It for all intents and purposes, it is true.
Dan Carlin makes this point all the time, the Tinkerbell effect. If enough people believe in Thor or Odin and then they act on those beliefs, doesn't that mean that Thor or Odin are acting in reality?
Well, it's and it's pretty easy to carry that thought process out into just normal everyday life. The only reason that the U.S. government operates is because everyone has faith in it. I mean, obviously, that faith is waning. I would probably argue intentionally, but it is intentionally being made to wane, rather. But it's if we all are egotistical and we all are in it for ourselves, that will have a very different outcome for the entire global community 20 years from now than if we all felt like we were all in this together and we all needed to look out for each other and support each other.
Yeah.
Those two thought processes globally will have very different outcomes, not tomorrow, but 20 years, 10, 20 years, 30 or 50 years down the line. You would have two very, very different worlds, right? And it would be based entirely off of what people believed. And if you're a Star Trek fan, they have a thing in Star Trek called a replicator. And it's like a literary device, obviously, but it's essentially, it can replicate anything that you want it to, food-wise, or I'm sure otherwise too, if you wanted it to. But it's in the show, it's an example of the power of the Federation and how far they've come from where we are now, right? All wars are essentially wars over energy or some form of it. And here they have
resources,
resources, yeah. And here's something they've created that ends all wars. I mean, who would fight over anything if you could just replicate it right there?
Yeah.
And there's an episode, I forget the actual episode number, but there's an episode where they are they discover a less advanced civilization, which is what they're always doing on the show. And that civilization finds out about the replicator, and they're at war, obviously, over resources. And they're like, "Well, just give us this replicator. We will no longer have to be at war. We'll be fine. Why wouldn't you give us this?" And the Federation wouldn't give it to them. And the reason that the Federation wouldn't give it to them is because you had it backwards. The Federation was able to develop this technology because first we developed, in that storyline, it's communism, right? We're all going to. It's like a utopic future where everyone's has their needs met and all that fun stuff that will probably never happen. But we have this technology because we developed that way as a society first. A society that is not looking out for each other could still develop this technology, but they wouldn't apply it like the same way that we've applied it. It would be behind a paywall, essentially. You're going to have to pay for it, even if it's free. That's just the way it works now. So we have to. I do agree that you can really shape reality with the way that you think, which is my understanding of Platoism or Platism.
Platonism, yeah.
Yeah, Platonism, thank you.
Well, may I say that you are super nerdy and super Marxist.
Yeah. Well,
analysis of history is red meat that I just can't wait to tear into. At first, I got to pee, so I'm going to mince to the bathroom, come right back, and then, I got to respond to that because that's some great stuff. And I'm back. That was my first ever pee-pee break of my system failure career. First of many, I'm sure, and it was quite delightful. I feel infinitely better now. I don't want to raise the curtain, draw back the curtain too far, but before the beginning of this pod, Brian and the captain and myself minced over to the bar across the street, where we proceeded to enjoy two Italian beers, Peronis, to lubricate the conversational wheels. I think they worked admirably, but it does mean you have to pee.
It does.
And I think when I left to pee, Sir Stuart, you were waxing ecstatic about the old Star Trek parable about the replicator being only for societies that have achieved egalitarianism. And much like I would say about the housing crisis, if you just create more houses, they're just going to be sucked up by the people that already have them, because the system of finance, the way we pay for them, is the system of finance, the very one warned about in the Bible, by the way, that runs on compound interest. And so, that is an interesting sort of view of history, that we have to achieve a certain maturity. The assumption is that there is a trajectory to the career of humankind. There's a shape to what's happening here. We're not just in a cyclical history like what the Hindus have their model, right? We are a stock market chart that's going up, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I do think it is going up, but I do think that there is also a cyclical nature to it. You know, it's not just an upward trajectory. It's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, seemingly again and again and again.
Well, that is an upward slope. That's a positive slope. That does mean you have to do...
It's more wave-like.
Does mean there are some unsettling collapses in there.
Yeah, it does. You certainly don't want to be in one of those times, which it looks like we're standing on the precipice of.
I've got some bad news, my friend. I think we may in fact have arrived at just such another Armageddon. But that's what's so... See, that's what I love about the magic, this business about magic. Because... magic, it's the whispers from the edges of society.
Yeah.
When things are running efficiently and well, even if it's a exploitative slave society like Rome, there's not much room for...
Who's paying attention to the guy with the sign on the street? Like, you're a fucking madman, dude. Look around you. Everybody's great.
The notion that the reality exists and you're a tiny mind moving around inside a broad reality seems perfectly applicable when you're in the presence of a system that's at least propagating itself well. It's reproducing itself over time with high fidelity versus collapsing and crumbling, like what we're seeing now. But it's during those times of collapse and crumble, like now, that, like I say, the whispers about magic start creeping in from the edges of society. I wonder, it's no coincidence that the lights in the sky are back again, and now things are falling apart. Like the Roman Empire was this thoroughgoing modern society. For them, a resurrection would be impossible, but nonetheless, the Jewish house slaves started whispering of this man who'd been resurrected, and eventually that idea took hold and took over the whole Roman Empire, to where Constantine became Christian, and Theodosius made Christianity the state religion of all of Rome. And the same thing happened during the Protestant Reformation. It was like the Protestant Reformation was marked by magic. Alchemists like Sir Isaac Newton, or like the Medici of Florence, who were obsessed with alchemy. The rulers of Prague who paid for, like Rudolph II, who paid for alchemists to live at his court. They took these magical ideals very seriously, and I think that early Christianity was magical, and it opposed the orthodox, authoritative paganism that was the Roman Empire.
Yeah, but the power structure crept in like it always does.
Yes, yeah. Christianity ossifies into this authoritative structure itself, where it discourages people. You don't have the magic wands. They remove the drugs from the Eucharist, the bread and the wine. You are not yourself. This is Neoplatonist lives next to Gnostics. Gnostic Christians in Alexandria, right? It wasn't until the 4th century that the aforementioned Theodosius wiped those people out and burned the library of Alexandria. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, that was a big loss.
I think that was Bishop Theophilus. He was the Christian bishop of Alexandria. I think that he was the one that oversaw the destruction of the library of Alexandria. But yeah, really appreciate that, dude.
Yeah, those Christians love them some knowledge.
And said another way, as Christianity took over as the state religion, you got rid of the magic, where you are a creator. Look, the Corpus Hermeticum, that famous magic book, comes from like 2nd and 3rd century Alexandria. And it says things like, you must make yourself like God to apprehend God, for like is known by like. I mean, that really encourages people to think of themselves as godlike, and that ain't great. If you're the person that's running an exploitative labor scheme where you're getting rich off other people's labor, you probably don't want those people. Like people who conceive of themselves as gods are not likely to participate in your exploitative labor scheme for very long, right?
No.
So you gotta alter Christianity so that it may create a version of it where you're a miserable sinner, where you're not creating, someone else created reality and you are apologetic to that person, and then that's going to be the thing that rules over the Middle Ages. But once it got and then magic crept in again, but eventually during the 13th T-Mac, the great Terence McKenna always says that the 13th century in the Holy Roman Empire was people assume that people weren't superstitious at all. It was a very not superstitious. The 12th century was a very not superstitious. The Roman Empire had people on lock. Everyone just believed what the church told them. It wasn't until like the Black Plague discredited the church and the printing press arrived, and people started, and the church started performing less and less well, and like being obviously greedy and hoarding wealth. And people started. That's when the whispers started coming in from the edges of society. Literally, the Medicis went and dug up Plato. The works, the work of Plato was lost for 1,000 years after the Roman Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire. It wasn't until the Medici agents dug that stuff up that it started to make a comeback, and they were obsessed with alchemy. The old story goes that the patriarch of the Medici clan, Cosimo de' Medici, he ordered a halt to the translation of Plato when the Corpus Hermeticum became available. I think John Argyropoulos, a guy named John he found it in Constantinople as that city was about to fall to the Turks in the 1450s. But like, they took magic very seriously. And then the same thing happened to magic, or at least that the Renaissance version of magic that happened to Christianity when it became the state religion of the Roman Empire. The Medicis were bankers. They invented the double entry bookkeeping that I use every day at my job. The Knights Templar were bankers. That's how they got started. Eventually, the banks took over. They used the forbidden tool of compound interest that the Bible warns against. And it was illegal for Christians to charge interest up until this time of the Renaissance. But the bankers became wealthier than the Vatican, and they took over as the new Caesar. And science, it's their version of magic, science, which is again a version of magic where you are wandering around, like the discovery of Galileo that the Earth orbits. Well, this is the Nicholas Copernicus and Tycho Brahe. The geocentric versus the heliocentric. The idea was that you are not the center of the universe here on Earth. We are lost in some cosmic backwater. That's unremarkable. Is another way of saying you are not godlike. You are just a humble mind inside a grand creation you can't possibly comprehend, and the magical insight that you're creating the reality you're experiencing was totally lost yet again in the interest of consolidating a massive economic scam, which is bankers loan money to entrepreneurs who use technology that comes from science to expand the economy and pay back the bankers, and the system chugs on until it can't anymore, until the expansion of the economy becomes impossible.
Till the clothes of the emperor fall off.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Yeah. So anyway, that's broadly where I think we're at. Like you're saying, you were just mentioning, you hate to live in one of those times of when but I think magic is the appropriate response to that, and possibly psychedelic magic, like what maybe Christianity was, eh?
Yeah. Well, it's. I think we have to figure something out here relatively soon as a species. About what the next step is going to be.
Something related to ego was your point just prior. Yeah,
it's there seems to be a lot of vectors for our ship to go up on the rocks here, so to speak. I forget that old theory, but the reason that we don't see more advanced civilizations out there is that civilizations have to pass through the eye of the needle when they develop technology where they can destroy it themselves, which we obviously can now since 1945. It's only been 70 or 80 years. But if we can get out to the other side, we have to realize that we're not individuals, and that, like you said, it's really more of like a grand painting that we're just in a particular point of right now. And who knows? Although again, maybe through our egotism, we will develop AI, and to us, that would be magic.
Yeah.
That would literally be magic.
Well, dare I suggest at this juncture that perhaps the escape isn't to another planet or to another 4D location within the Matrix, but to escape outside the dimension to higher dimensional space. Like if you, the meat of Christopher Stewart, cast a 2-dimensional shadow on the sidewalk, and we're living in some kind of a shadow that's cast by a higher dimensional reality, why then we're right back to Plato's allegory of the cave, at which you began this whole discussion.
Yeah. Well, one thing I find very odd about at least the scientific understanding of this reality and universe, as far as a space-time, is that it seems very odd to me that when you take something as powerful as the Hubble Space Telescope in the visible spectrum, or the recently launched James Webb Telescope in the ultraviolet spectrum, and you point it to the deepest, darkest spaces in the sky, right? And you do an overexposure and you see what's there. It turns out there's as many galaxies there as you could possibly count, right? And the striking thing to me about galaxies, when you look at them in pictures like that, is they look remarkably like cells under a microscope.
The great alchemical maxim, as above, so below.
Yeah. Exactly. I got that from you too. And at the same time, they're also building more and more impressive machines like, CERN over there in Europe, where they're, CERN's, I forget how big it is, but it's a big ring.
Kilometers
like,
at this point. And they want to build a bigger one.
Yeah, it's like 10 kilometers in diameter, something like that. Massive, massive circle of magnets where they accelerate particles to, not the speed of light, but close to the speed of light, and smash them into each other to see what happens. I mean, fantastically energetic explosions that you wouldn't know if you were standing 10 feet away from them. But they keep on finding smaller and smaller building blocks of particles. No matter how small a particle they take and how fast they accelerate it in something else, it always seems to split into something else.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. Are we just like somewhere on a spectrum, like a sliding scale of reality, I guess? If you could scale out your zooms far enough, are we really inside cells on some gigantic creature or something like that? Who the fuck knows? You know? If you zoom down far enough, does it look like there's like amoebas like freaking swimming around and eating each other? I don't know. It seems farcical, but it's almost. I don't know.
Maybe the whole thing exists inside our mind. I mean, maybe that's why we impose these structures that look like solar systems on both the Bohr theory of the atom and on the broader galactic scale. I mean, maybe I don't know what to make of it. It does seem like whatever direction you look, it just unfolds infinitely.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether a finite universe or an infinite universe is more stupefying to the stat apparatus of my cranial matter.
Yeah, I don't know. Hey, Brian.
Hello. Well, yeah. See, I think if we just want to transcend our dimension or whatever and get to like some higher level of being, see, I think that cultivation is the name of the game, right? I mean, that's something you have to cultivate in yourself. And
is that any different than an AI or the human species? In a cyberpunk-esque way, method, sticking a chip in each one of our brains and becoming, one node in a super colony. That entity would certainly be a lot different than, the individual nodes that we have right now talking on TikTok and Facebook and SMSing each other,
Well, I think the AI, like if we put a chip in our brain, it probably would work like these Apple Watches where they're getting you to like sleep and exercise and overall, raise your power level, so to speak. And if the AI is actually going to help, it's going to like empower each of us somehow. I mean, maybe some kind of, text messaging, telekinetically or something could help improve the situation. But I mean, if AI starts actually empowering us, each of us as individuals, to maximize what we're capable of, well, that could certainly give us a kick in the right direction.
I don't think it's amiss to note at this point that doesn't the advent of AI blow out the capitalist model overnight? The amount of jobs that AI can things like lawyers and
it won't survive.
They're already reading MRIs better than surgeons are. The AIs are. It's not enough people are going to be able to make money as employees to make a system of employees and employers capable of replicating itself into the future for too much longer. And so, again,
it's like breaking down now.
Yeah. It's well, what's the world going to be like in 2030? We don't have a lot of time before we're going to see massive changes. And as the conceptual framework, the milieu that wakes up each of us up in the morning to go to work, as that rationale collapses, we're just going to see people are going to the anchor chain that tethers us all to reality is just going to be completely severed.
I mean, just one issue, AI is being developed by like Google, who probably aren't trying to set us free as much as, profit off of our life force.
Yeah, the shareholders of Google, the board of directors and the major shareholders, are going to try to maintain their status as successful employers and make themselves tons of money, even as they no longer need employees to buy the products that they produce.
I do agree that's true. That AI through the lens of capitalism is probably not going to be a great outcome for us as the plebs. But I also do not think that Google will be able to control a real AI. People think it's going to be like an Einstein talking to a toddler, but it's really going to be like an Einstein talking to a fucking mouse, and we're the mouse.
Well, we can only hope.
I share that sense too. I can't, there's no way we're all going to consent to participate in a system where a tiny number of people, a tiny number of people who own the major means of production just have all the wealth. It can't work because they derive their wealth from people spending their incomes, the same incomes that they're curtailing with replacing with their technology. It's like, collectively, it just can't work. It's not going to work for anyone. So I have great hope I tend to be optimistic when it comes to AI because I think that it's just going to obviate. I mean, to be fair, they did say this about the power loom in the 1850s. Well, but it's going to put everyone out of work. But this time, the exponential power is just not something that we're going to be able to.
I do think that we'll probably fare better with the AI than, say, the Jeff Bezoses of the world.
Yeah.
But who actually knows? It's
It's been some 50 years of degradation, in my estimation, that we have that the corporate interests have had everything their own way, and it's really led to a manic situation that now we're going to have to unwind in some way. And let's hope we don't unwind it violently. Well, hopefully we can unwind it in some organized fashion, and maybe that's where AI comes in.
All right. Well, on that prayer.
All right. Well, I just want to say it's been a real pleasure, boys. Let's do it all again real soon. And dare I suggest that we, like General MacArthur returning to the Philippines, make a return to the barroom from whence we came at the top of this pod and refresh ourselves with maybe one more Peroni.
Well, and dare I suggest that our humble listeners perchance send us an email.
Oh, yeah.
Tell them where to eat.
Please do send us an email. Let us know why we're barking mad and why we should be ashamed to now be advocating for magic after being so sober and so normal early in our lives, Sir Stuart.
Yeah, let these guys have it.
You can reach us at not.substack.com. And if you're not a bot that's advertising for SEO or YouTube optimization, we shall read your email in this very space and respond to it. So again, that's nop@substack.com is the email. And if you want to read some exciting articles about the manifold glories of the magical history of humankind, then you can visit nop.substack.com. So we'll hopefully see you online. Have a great week, folks.
We'll see you.